bullets were really right past my head. It was kind of traumatic. I'm still kind of in shock because of it.
The injuries are serious. One St. Louis County officer was shot in the shoulder. Another officer, a Webster Groves officer, shot in the face.
These police officers were standing there, and they were shot just because they were police officers.
Our guest is a former police officer in Atlanta, Georgia, also an attorney, and he's author of Observations of White Noise, an acid test for the First Amendment. It's a pleasure to welcome Marc Harrold back to MidPoint. Marc, it's a pleasure to have you on the show again. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Marc, we heard from one of the officers there that they were surprised at how quickly this got out of control. Are they underestimating exactly how tense the situation remains there in Ferguson, and maybe they overlooked what might happen?
Well, I don't know that they're underestimating it. I'm sure they're taking it very seriously, and they know it's a powder keg. The problem is to protect the First Amendment protesters, which they have every right to protest, and there are some issues that need a dialogue here. It appears there are some problems in Ferguson. But, you know, the main thing that you do when you have protests is it's a fixed post situation. For the most part, police officers are spread out in various areas of a perimeter so that the protesters can, you know, hopefully protest peacefully. What that does, though, is it leaves you completely vulnerable as a police officer to be standing out there in uniform in a fixed post for something like this to happen. You know, you're standing right outside the precinct, or you're on a corner, you're directing traffic. And even if they don't underestimate the danger, it's almost impossible to really protect yourself from it if somebody's willing to just, you know, throw shots at you just because you're wearing a uniform.
Could this indeed be just you have other interlopers who are coming in here just looking to hijack this community at this point? Because apparently the protest had gotten very peaceful at that point. People were already leaving. That's when the shots rang out, and some are indicating that this may just be somebody trying to make hay while they're in Ferguson and go after cops.
Oh, I think that could very well be the case. We'll have to find the shooter or the shooters. Hopefully they will soon. These are obviously, you know, probably desperate individuals who, if anything, probably show a propensity when they are attempt to be apprehended by law enforcement, assuming they're identified, they'll most likely, you know, shoot at the police more. Absolutely. We don't want to disrespect people who are lawful and peaceful protesters who actually have, you know, grievances to air. We don't want to lump these shooters in with those protesters. Those protesters are, you know, doing what they feel is right to improve their community, to improve race relations, police relations. These individuals who just shot at police in this cowardly way have nothing to do with those protesters, peaceful protesters. They're not part of the dialogue, and I agree with you. And when they're identified, we may see that they're from out of town. They just came in there to cause trouble. A lot of people want to borrow the rage, but don't want to have anything to do with the solution.
There are those also who are saying that when Eric Holder goes public, and the more the administration talks about this, and the more the media talks about this, this is helping to drive the narrative of a dirty police department, of every cop being bad, and this is not good. This is part of the problem right here, and that maybe people need to take their foot off the gas a little bit, let these investigations happen, let change happen in Ferguson, and stop trying to drive a narrative.
Well, I think there's some truth to that. You know, the federal government it doesn't always fit in every situation, but once they focus in on something, they always feel they need to do something. What I think happened here is, I think that Holder and some of the other administration officials gave the indication that when the officer wasn't charged locally, that somehow there was going to be a federal response to it, or there was going to be some sort of federal remedy. But as Eric Holder and everybody else knows, it's very narrowly tailored when you can charge a police officer with civil rights violation. There has to be a certain level of intent. It's a very strict standard. And I think they knew that. And I think what happened is they came out the other end. They got a lot of criticism from certain communities that they didn't do anything. So then they come up with the report. I have no idea how accurate the report is, but they come up with the report because they need to show that they're going to do something. Because I believe when the president spoke, you know, when the charges weren't filed, the president spoke, and he spoke about the protest. He at least gave the idea that the feds were going to do something. And since they couldn't go with civil rights violations in this case, because it didn't make that kind of case with the evidence that they had, then they came up with the report, possibly a consent decree, and they still want to have some credibility here in this situation that they're doing something.
Marc, 15 seconds. Do you think they're going to need to disband the Ferguson Police Department?
I don't know if they're going to disband it with every officer, but it's certainly going to be beyond just the chief and a reorganization. And at some point, it's going to get to the point, you know, a lot of police officers aren't going to want to work there, and the attrition will come naturally.
There you go. I want to remind everybody that Marc's book is called Observations of White Noise, an acid test for the First Amendment. He is nice enough to join us from time to time and bring us his expertise as well as a former officer in the Atlanta PD. Marc, always a pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, and I pray for those officers.
Yes, we all do. Thank you very much. And last word, by the way, we should point out that the officers have been released from the hospital. Next up, John Kerry's gone on the offensive about the Iran nuclear deal. Another loggerhead with Congress and the administration. Gee, what a shock.